From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
The world marks 1 year since the October 7th attack on Israel, with fighting in the Middle East escalating as the Israeli Defense Forces intercept missiles fired by Hamas and continue operations in Gaza and southern Lebanon.
We'll have more on the year of war in the region and how it has affected U.S. politics with former National Security Council member Michael Allen and Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan.
Plus, we'll have the latest from the campaign trail, including Donald Trump's return to the site of the first attempt on his life alongside Elon Musk over the weekend. Kamala Harris's sit-down with 60 Minutes set to air tonight. Our signature panel will weigh in. Welcome to the Monday edition of Balance of Power. Kaylee, that's the beginning of quite the media blitz for Kamala Harris. She's going to be doing a series of interviews tomorrow in New York, appearing as well today in a public ceremony acknowledging this solemn moment that we have today.
Yeah, of course, it's not just her. President Biden marking the 1 year mark since October 7th at the White House as well. Donald Trump doing so, too. And we expect to hear from him in just about an hour when he'll be speaking at an event in Florida marking this very sober 365 days of what has been war in the Middle East.
Here we are 1 year into this. The vice president speaking a short time ago at the White House.
On this solemn day, I will restate my pledge to always ensure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself, and that I will always work to ensure the safety and security of the Jewish people here and around the world. We must work to relieve the immense suffering of innocent Palestinians in Gaza who have experienced so much pain and loss over the year.
Joining us now for more are Bloomberg's Michelle Jamrisco and Daniel Flatley, who cover the White House and national security for us. Thank you both for being here. As we consider what this past year has brought, not just the life lost, the hostages taken on October 7th, but tens of thousands of lives lost in the fighting that has ensued in the region since then, we have gotten now to the 1 year mark with no end to that fighting in sight, Dan.
Yes, a somber day, certainly. And to your point, Kaylee, it only seems like more fighting from here on out for a while. Obviously, the day started with rockets fired by Hamas into Israel. We know that there's a ground incursion into Lebanon by Israel, along with an air campaign in order to, as Israel has described it, to sort of take out some military targets in that area so that they can start moving some people back into northern Israel. But obviously, these rockets from Hamas show that we're talking about multiple fronts here, not just on the borders of Israel, but also in the Red Sea with the Houthis. And we had almost 200 ballistic missiles fired by Iran into Israeli airspace, hitting the ground in some places in Israel. Over the last week. So very complex security situation and no particular end in sight, unfortunately.
The comments we're hearing today from Joe Biden and from Kamala Harris remind us a bit of the lack of influence that the administration seems to have over outcomes right now. Michelle, what's next? We've seen the Secretary of State go over 10 times. They've dispatched Amos Hochstein, the director of the CIA. Is there another card to play here?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that the White House rhetorically also has struggled with in terms of explaining, what gives. You've had these deliberate negotiations. You've had these, trips, as you say, to the region constantly. You're in constant communication, as you say, with Israeli officials. Yeah. I think one thing that folks are increasingly pointing to is the lack of direct communication between the president and Prime Minister Netanyahu. Karine Jean-Pierre today in the White House briefing was saying they've spoken 12 times over the past year, which when you think about a full year, maybe doesn't seem like so much when all that is going on, repeatedly day to day. So I think they certainly are at pains to describe how the relationship is maintaining a fruitful nature, that both sides are hearing the other, when it does appear to be the case that Israel is kind of going its own way on a lot of these decisions that make it harder for the U.S. to justify a stalwart support. But on a day like this, of course, the tone is very different. You're not hearing that sort of complication coming from the administration, nor from, of course, Donald Trump on the other side, who both sides are kind of expressing their stalwart support. You heard it from the vice president there.
Yep.
Always have a right to defend themselves, and will provide the resources to do so.
But it's been a delicate dance for Kamala Harris and for Joe Biden when he was still the presumptive Democratic nominees. This is a political issue within the Democratic Party specifically, and in states that could decide the election, like Michigan, where there is a large Arab American and Muslim population. The fact that things seem to be heating up rather than cooling down as we get closer and closer to Election Day in November just points to how politicized this all could potentially be, and the fact that it could have some blowback on Kamala Harris.
For sure, and that's something that Harris has had to grapple with, really all year, because she came out early in the year and was seen, before she was the nominee, was seen as more empathetic to Arab Americans than perhaps the president and certainly some others who have been speaking out on this from Washington. But now it looks like, she is losing that support, as you mentioned, within the party, particularly with, some discussions around the non-participatory involvement of folks at the convention from the Arab American side. We heard a lot from the Israeli side. And so there does seem to be this kind of uneven play here which could get her into trouble electorally, as you mentioned, in places like Michigan. And it's something that Trump is increasingly willing to try to exploit and say, I'm actually a champion for all of these people, and saying, this never would have happened if I were president, making that case as well.
Dan, what's the Pentagon's posture here? Obviously, you've got a defense secretary urging restraint, but at the same time surging assets into the region. What are we prepared for in the coming days?
Well, the Pentagon is they're fond of saying we're a planning organization. So you're planning for all contingencies, right? But obviously, we've seen a surging of U.S. personnel into the region. There is some debate as to whether that is keeping a lid on things, or is it giving Israel cover to perhaps be more aggressive in some of their military campaigns than they would be otherwise. I'm not sure that there's a real succinct answer to that question, but certainly the U.S. military is prepared for any contingency, I think, but wants to avoid a larger regional war as much as possible. And whether that means that will act as a deterrent or an accelerant, we will just have to wait and see.
Well, especially as we're still waiting to see how, if ever, Israel responds to the barrage of missiles Iran sent its way last week, as you mentioned earlier. Dan, do we have a sense of what that timing could look like?
It's interesting, Kayleigh, with this back and forth that we've seen directly between Israel and Iran this year. I mean, this is almost unprecedented. Certainly the activity last week was unprecedented. And so we are waiting for that Israeli response. When it will come, we don't know. Last time in April, the response was relatively measured. They just took out an air defense site. Whether that is going to be something, we'll see something similar this time, we don't know. Whether and when it will come, we don't know. You sort of want to keep the enemy guessing as much as you can. But I suspect that we'll see something sooner rather than later, because they don't want to, Israel would not want to let this go on too long without a response.
Thanks to both of you for joining us here at another important moment. Bloomberg's Michelle Jamrisco and Dan Flatley with us on Balance of Power. Coming up, we'll expand our conversation on the long-term impact of the Hamas attack on Israel 1 year ago today. With Michael Allen, the former NSC official, now with Beacon Global Strategies, is up next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
I think we have to be prepared to confront Iran. Iran launched almost 200 ballistic missiles at Israel a week ago tomorrow. It was an escalation unlike anything we've seen in the region before. The response against Iran, as President Biden said, it needs to be proportionate. Israel needs to restore its deterrence, as it's done with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And we need to get to a place where the regime understands that they don't have a free hand.
It's Congressman Brad Schneider, the Democrat from Illinois, with us on the early edition of Balance of Power today, talking about the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and its neighbors, the role of the U.S. as well. And joining us now is Michael Allen, Managing Director, Partner, Beacon Global Strategies, a veteran of the National Security Council in the Bush White House. Great to see you back at the table.
Thank you.
The congressman used an important word there, proportionate.
Yes.
What does that look like this time?
Well, I think it would look something akin to what Iran had done to Israel, but I kind of think Israel's going to go big. I think Israel is thinking to themselves, we have an opportunity here. We have to reset deterrence. This is what we were most concerned about having lost on October 7th a year ago, and we need to make them fear us again. So I think they're going to go for military, conventional weapon sites, definitely. I think they need to take out ballistic missile sites so that when there's a retaliation back from Iran, there'll be fewer missiles to hit. Yeah. But I also think they're going to go for energy platforms and infrastructure, and they might go for some nuclear sites.
Well, and the concern, if they do that, is that that is perhaps the most escalatory move of all, because it's unclear what Iran will do next, which raises the broader question of everything we have seen Israel do up to this point and what we may see them do in response to what Iran did last week. Has all of that made the world more dangerous and Israel less safe than more safe since October 7th?
So I think it's a fair point, but I think from their perspective that they felt unsafe on at least these three fronts. Hezbollah, we already know the story in Hamas in Gaza, and of course they would say Iran is now taking shots at us for the first time in history from their own territory. And so while we can't eliminate them completely, I think they think we've got to severely degrade them. So if go for nuclear sites, that will be a big decision. I don't think they're optimally suited to do it, however. They really need the United States. They really need some deep, penetrating ordinances to be able to get into these mountains, to get to these centrifuge halls. But there might be some sites that are critical nodes or part of weaponization that they feel like, you know what, why don't we just try to hit it a little bit because we're going to have to come back again one day.
What does the U.S. have that Israel does not have? What bunker-busting technology would we use if it was a U.S. operation?
So I think you just nailed it. The bunker buster is generally called the mother of all bombs, the Moab.
That is
the
one.
Literally
we're
it.
We're not handing out.
We have not given them one. I don't think they've asked in a while. I don't think, certainly, the Biden administration wouldn't countenance the idea.
Yeah.
Not sure if they asked during the Trump administration. We may have an upgrade over the Moab, unclear totally, but it's definitely something a lot heavier than they have today. And they also have refueling issues and how much time over target. There's a bunch of complicating factors given how many sites there are.
Okay, so this administration hasn't given those to Israel, but this administration's only around for a few more months. Someone new will be sitting in the Oval Office come January. And one of them, Vice President Harris, sat down for an interview with 60 Minutes. It's set to air tonight, but this is a piece of what she had to say when she was asked about the U.S.'s relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu. Take a listen.
I think, with all due respect, the better question is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people? And the answer to that question is yes.
Not an important alliance with Prime Minister Netanyahu. So if you are the Prime Minister, in his fragile position within his coalition government, knowing that that is potentially who you could be dealing with in the United States come January, how does that change your decision-making now that there's no guarantee it will be another Donald Trump presidency that you've experienced before?
So I think, arguably, it makes them want to go faster and hit nuclear sites while they can. By the way, two in-the-center type Israeli politicians, Naftali Bennett, who was previously the prime minister, and Benny Gantz have also said things to the effect of, we're never going to get a better opportunity than now to hit some of their nuclear sites. That doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean they're not engaging in a little bit of politics themselves to stake out area to the right of Netanyahu. But I think it's a big factor going forward. I think even if it's Kamala Harris, he'll want to press the reset button at some point with the United States, and he has to keep that in mind. And it may cause him to go faster now while Biden's a lame duck.
So you've got a 4-week window, essentially, that you just laid out. How do you best use it?
I think they're going to hit Israel Israel will hit Iran sometime this week. I do believe there'll be a retaliation coming from Iran. The big question is, will they do as Iran has vowed that they will do, which is to hit oil facilities in the UAE, Saudi. They even added in, I believe, Oman and Azerbaijan. If they try to do that, the United States would be more involved, I believe, in trying to knock these missiles down. But that would be escalatory. You may see another couple of cycles on the escalatory ladder before this begins to calm down.
That means we could have $100, $150 a barrel oil in time for the election, though, is it not?
I think it could definitely rise. I think that's always been a factor from the United States viewpoint, which is like, let's not let this get out of control because of the price of oil. And for many other reasons, we don't want it to escalate. But things are getting crazy.
Does Iran want to do that to the global economy and the U.S. economy specifically on the eve of the election, knowing that Iran, according to the Department of Justice, which has actually prosecuted people for this, is actively trying to hack into the Trump campaign, as we've seen, sow mis and disinformation online, trying to disrupt the American electoral process?
I think Iran would rather Israel not do it at all because this is their lifeblood. Oil is their economy. They haven't been sanctioned in a large way, at least in terms of the enforcement of the sanctions of late. And I feel like they're saying to us, don't hit our oil infrastructure, because that is when we would start escalating elsewhere in the region. They're trying to inspire fear on the part of the United States and in Europe that a big bunch of oil is going to come off market. So put all the pressure that you have on Israel so that they don't hit our oil infrastructure.
Kayleigh pointed us to the remarks from Kamala Harris about our alliance with Benjamin Netanyahu versus the people of Israel. Whoever the next president is will likely be dealing eventually with someone else in charge of that country. Donald Trump's approach versus Kamala Harris's approach means what difference to you?
So I think it's inevitable that Republicans in general and Trump in particular would give the Israeli people a wider berth. Trump has said as much, by the way. I was surprised that he actually said within the last few days that, of course, they should go after the nuclear sites. Of course, he's trying to be different than Biden and take the opposite position at any given moment. But that's a big step that he took there. That is green-lighting Iran, certainly after the election, to go after nuclear sites. I would be
Israel to go after
Iranian nuclear sites. I would be careful about that, by the way, because at the end of the day, once we're in a post-election situation, Trump isn't going to be there to bomb nuclear facilities. If he's for anything or against anything, it's endless wars, and he is not going to start a war, I believe, with Iran. He may try to take major players off the battlefield like he did with General Soleimani, but I think a big conventional strike against Iran is off the table.
Just quickly, as we have heard from Trump and a number of other Republicans, that this has all happened because this administration, the Biden administration, has been too soft on Iran. You mentioned sanctions enforcement just a moment ago. Isn't that a China problem? What role does China have in this conversation?
So the Trump team would say, and it's a fair point, that when they were in office, they went to our allies in Asia and said, please don't buy Iranian oil. Now, they also went to the Chinese. I don't think the Chinese were very cooperative, but as long as they were getting the Koreans and the Japanese and others around the world, it had a downward pressure effect on price per barrel. And so Iran had less discretionary funding to fund terrorists around the world. But it's a fair point, especially when you see that Russia has been kept afloat by China. These two are thick as thieves now, and they're going to bail each other out of every contingency going forward that we can put before them.
All right, Michael Allen, always great to have you here on Balance of Power. He's managing director and partner of Beacon Global Strategies, also former member of the National Security Council in the Bush White House. Now, still ahead, Arizona preparing for all possibilities on Election Day. We have new reporting on the security and transparency efforts in that battleground state. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Early in-person voting is starting this week in a number of states, including Arizona on Wednesday. It's a battleground that's at the epicenter of security concerns when it comes to the upcoming election. Wrought iron fencing, police forces, and security cameras are just some of the efforts officials are making in Maricopa County in particular. And joining us now with her reporting on these efforts is Bloomberg's Jamie Terabay in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Jamie, obviously they are trying to do a lot to physically secure the areas in which the vote is happening and being tallied. But what other security measures are necessary that aren't necessarily physical threats, cyber threats, for example?
You know, one of the most interesting things is that they've done so many different drills to shore up the security side for election workers. They've done deep fake exercises where they've actually done exercises where election officials will have done phone calls to election workers, but it's not really the election official, it's a deep fake of them, and really explaining to these people how the technology can be used to be weaponized to to influence the vote, or at least influence their behavior. So it's just, there are so many different things that they're doing, and there's also just, they're tracking everything, they're auditing everything, and everyone who swipes their badge to get through into those rooms, that's all logged. And, you know, it's a lot, but I think that out of an abundance of caution, and of course, given the experience that they had 4 years ago, it feels pretty merited.
Well, this show of force is not a surprise, I suppose, and I suspect it's aimed at creating confidence, instilling confidence in the system. Does it also make some people worry about Big Brother, that this is exactly what we were worried about? We can't see what's going on behind the iron bars and the mounted police.
I feel like in Maricopa County in particular, they've done so much to address that. They have opened the tabulation center for tours, and they've gone through things like, this is how we verify your signature, because one of the conspiracy theories was that unsigned or fake ballots were being used and counted as votes. And one of the other things that they do is there are 2 separate surveillance camera systems, including one that is a live stream 24 hours a day. You can actually go online and see it. So they may have a fence that you can only go through if you've been cleared, but on the inside, they are trying to show people and give them as much access as possible to what is actually happening behind all those closed doors.
Yeah. Is part of this also teaching people that we're not going to know necessarily who the president is on the night of the election?
Yes. But I think that in Arizona, they have a high percentage of mail-in voter ballots. And so the count will definitely be happening, but there is definitely an expectation in Maricopa that they will not have a result before the end of the day.
Got it. Boy, that's something that we're going to also be, I think, reminding people of a lot. Bloomberg's Jamie Terabay with a great story here on the terminal and online with some fascinating images. Jamie went out to Arizona to do some great reporting on this that you're going to want to check out. Coming up, we're marking a year, once again, since October 7th and the attacks, as about 100 hostages now, including American citizens, are understood to be held still by Hamas. We'll be joined by Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan, who co-chairs the Congressional Task Force on American Hostages, next on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg TV and radio.
October 7th, 2023 was, of course, also the day when Hamas took 254 people hostage, including 12 Americans. An estimated 101 of those hostages still remain in Gaza, including 7 Americans: Itay Chen, Judith Weinstein, Gad Hagay, Eden Alexander, Keith Siegel, Sagi Dekel-Chen, and Omar Nutra. Hamas should release every one of these hostages immediately.
Matthew Miller, spokesperson for the State Department, earlier talking about the hostages that were taken from Israel by Hamas a year ago today, on October 7th, 2023. Joining us now for more here on Bloomberg TV and radio is Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan, who co-chairs the Congressional Task Force on American Hostages. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here as we mark this very somber 1 year since not only lives were lost in the Hamas attack on Israel, but many were taken by Hamas and still remain held by them. What is your message to the hostage families and the hostages themselves who are wondering 1 year into this whether they'll ever get to come home?
This is an absolutely brutal and open wound marker of a day, 1 year held in captivity in tunnels, no communication with family, no access to proper food, water, or even air in some cases. And we have a very clear message to the hostages. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. We are fighting for you. We are working to bring you home. We are working alongside the Israeli government and an international community, certainly to our fellow Americans. You are the heartbeat of what we are working on in the Congress. Just last November, we passed a resolution to condemn Hamas, to call for the release of the hostages, and it was voted on 414-0. Every voting member of Congress that day called for the release of the hostages. And of course, to the families, these brave, courageous, admirable families. I was on a Zoom earlier today with Aviva Siegel, whose husband Keith is still remained in captivity. Aviva was there herself for 51 days. It is absolutely harrowing to hear her story, and yet she continues to tell it. The families continue to show up. They continue to advocate. And this was an attack on October 7th on all of humanity, on free humans, human beings going to music concerts, living in their homes, who were taken. Yeah. We have a non-state actor, Kaylee, who we cannot really easily negotiate with. We were misled 51 days into this, certainly as a population, that they seemed like they could negotiate, Hamas, but they don't care. They do not care, and that is why about a month and a half ago, they murdered in cold blood 6 hostages who had been in those tunnels. One American, Hirsch Goldberg, Poland, whose family is absolutely remarkable and who I was so pleased to see featured at the Democrat National Convention.
Yeah, we do think of the families, Congresswoman, having learned today. Eden Stivy, a 28-year-old who was kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival, has been declared dead in absentia, according to the Prime Minister. We spoke earlier today on the early edition of Balance of Power with Democratic Congressman Brad Schneider, your colleague from Illinois. Here's what he had to say about the likelihood of a resolution and what might be facing the next president.
It's hard to imagine that a resolution is on the near horizon. As was mentioned, I don't think I'd call it a widening conflict in the region. Hezbollah started firing rockets at Israel on October 8th. The Houthis from Yemen, Iran has launched 2 strikes in April and on October 1st. It's certainly escalating, and it's hard to imagine that it'll be resolved within the next 4 weeks.
With that said, we advance to the next president here, Congresswoman. Will the White House, will the administration, the U.S. government have more influence over outcomes at that point?
Well, I think we've seen some of the limitations that we have faced in this regard, even with the full force and weight of a presidential administration and the Congress working towards an outcome to free the hostages and reach a just end to this war. And at every turn, Hamas has rejected, Hamas has doubled down. They've overseen the killing of their own civilians in Gaza, innocent Palestinians. And it's just way too much suffering. It is a reminder of what jihad terrorism looks like and why we need to stand by democratic allies. Today's a reminder of who started this war. And I had the very profound opportunity following from the announcement, the tragic announcement that Hirsch Goldberg, Poland, and 5 others were murdered, to talk to Vice President Harris about that and to thank her for her statement and her actions and for speaking out. And she immediately jumped on what I was saying, gave me some key updates, let me know that she had just left the White House, as a matter of fact, and had been working on this issue while she's, now in Michigan on a brief campaign stop. And every time I've talked to the Biden-Harris administration, they have been so laser focused. Biden, with his foreign policy expertise, and certainly Kamala Harris showing everyone in the debate that she had with her competitor what a grasp she has of foreign policy. That is who we need standing up to Putin. That is who we need standing up to Hamas and to continue to bring together the world order alongside our democratic allies. And I couldn't be more proud to be supporting her election here in Michigan and across the country. And I know her leadership will not bring chaos, will not bring confusion, will bring clarity and consistency and the firmness we need to bring these hostages home.
Well, Congresswoman, while Harris may have your support, she does not have the support of everyone, including the Abandoned Harris Group, which today decided to endorse Jill Stein, and in a statement in part said our movement remains dedicated to ensuring that the American people, especially the Muslim American community, recognize the responsibility we share in standing up against oppression and using all our power to stop genocide. There are still those in Michigan, Congresswoman, who find that Kamala Harris has not done enough to stop what they see is genocide. How many votes could she lose over this ongoing conflict in the Middle East?
Well, allow me to speak from my perch of Oakland County, Michigan, in Michigan's 11th district that will certainly cast a very large number of votes, probably the highest number of votes in this presidential election. I have not seen one Jill Stein sign in my district. I did see 2 RFK signs earlier in the cycle. They're now gone. I am crisscrossing my district on a regular basis from Madison Heights, Hazel Park on the east side of Oakland County to Bloomfield Hills, Pontiac, and into Commerce and Wixom on the west side of Oakland County. And you see Harris signs and you see Trump signs, but you do not see Jill Stein signs. And that is certainly not to underestimate in a very close election with some fracturing. And obviously this abandoned movement is national and it does have some traction here in Michigan. It could make a difference, but I'm a proud Democrat. And I think what you saw at the Democrat National Convention, an exciting, vibrant, inclusive convention that brought together our party from all 50 states and other voting blocs. Look, we're on the right side of issues when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to the economy, delivering for advanced manufacturing and our supply chains, not causing these disruptions like what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic and when Donald Trump threatened my governor to not give her the supply she needed to fight back on COVID, putting our whole economy into disarray. We've been rebuilding. We're competing at the world stage, on the world stage in new innovations and new mobilities. And all Donald Trump does is fearmonger. Kamala Harris presents a vision for the future. She was just in Flint saying, I'm going to invest in you. I believe Flint, Michigan is going to vote for Kamala Harris, not the other guy.
Congresswoman, it's great to have you back, as always. Haley Stevens, the Democrat from Michigan, with us here on Balance of Power. Coming up, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris taking part in events marking the year since October 7th. Our signature panel will be next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I am devastated by the pain and loss that occurred on October 7th, and Doug and I pray for the family and loved ones of all of those who were lost. And may their memories be a blessing.
Vice President Kamala Harris earlier today at the White House before planting a pomegranate tree in honor of the victims of October 7th. Let's assemble our signature panel today. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, is with us, alongside Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Great to have you both with us on the Monday edition of Balance of Power. October 7, Jeannie, means what for Kamala Harris? And I ask you that knowing about the protest vote that Joe Biden faced on the primary trail, and her words being scrutinized here by progressives looking for some sunlight between Harris and Biden.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's hard to talk about the politics of this day because it is such a solemn day, and yet it has consumed the campaign trail, obviously, today, and will continue to for the very reason you just said, because you've got people on the left who have, been frustrated with the Biden administration's response. They let that be known very loudly during the primary, and they decided they weren't gonna, in this uncommitted line, endorse Kamala Harris for the presidency. And so that is a challenge for her, but she's also being squeezed on the other way because you've got voters on the other side who are very frustrated with the fact that they feel like the Biden administration has not been supportive enough of Israel. And so they are voicing their frustration. So, I think it speaks to the fact how hard it is to be an incumbent or part of an incumbent administration dealing with an issue like this. And Kamala Harris is feeling that heat today. But I do think tonally she has been right on. And I would just juxtapose that with the 2 radio interviews Donald Trump did today, in which he was bemoaning the fact that he doesn't get more Jewish support. That is not the tone I think that should be set during a day, and on a day like today.
Well, as we consider the way that voters are thinking about these issues, how big is the group of voters that really will be voting based off of foreign policy calculations, whether that is in the Middle East or elsewhere? Is it more the potential economic ramifications of that foreign policy, like if this escalating conflict that we're seeing right now leads to higher oil prices before people head to the polls?
Yeah, well, I think this is the great juxtaposition between economic voters who care about oil prices and gasoline at the pump and those who believe in, preserving the democracy that exists in the Middle East, Israel, and protecting it from its neighbors, Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, all these terrorist organizations that are at the front of this issue. So I think Kamala Harris has been doing a good job of sort of building out her foreign policy credentials, and I'm surprised she didn't use this moment as a way of brandishing more of them. Very understated day, 28 days left. There's no such thing as a day off from the campaign at this point. And I respect the thoughts and wishes of people who have been directly affected by this, but they also want to know what is it that's going to be your policy to Israel. And I would say those who are negatively affected by her support for Israel are a pretty small group of voters in only a few states, one of which is an important state. So, if 100,000 voters are against her that otherwise would have voted for her in Michigan because of this issue, that's a big impact. Yeah. So small number of people can have outward, otherwise a lot of leverage in a state like Michigan right now.
So does any of this stuff help Harris? Jeannie, if we're talking about $100, $150 for a barrel of oil, depending on what happens here, if Israel decides to hit Iranian oil installations, she carries the liability of the incumbent here, correct?
She does. I mean, this does not help her. She can try to make the most of it politically by showing her foreign policy bona fides, and that was Rick was just talking about. But this is not what she wants to be talking about. This is an issue where she is a part of the administration. So even the question on 60 Minutes that we'll hear more from tonight, where he asks about Benjamin Netanyahu, she can't, as the sitting vice president, take on Benjamin Netanyahu too critically. And so I think she did an okay job dodging that question, but it's not going to leave voters particularly satisfied. And what is the answer? This is an issue that has confounded almost every U.S. president for the last 30, 40, 50 years almost since Israel was created, and the situation is getting worse, not better. And an election this tight, a few thousand votes in Michigan or Wisconsin can matter. And in the primary, again, they had, 40,000 in Wisconsin, more than 100,000 in Michigan. That's a lot of voters that she cannot lose in an election this tight in states that important.
All right, Jeannie and Rick, stay with us because Jeannie mentioned that 60 Minutes interview. Kamala Harris doing a media blitz as she tries to reach key voters ahead of the election. We'll have more on that with the panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
President Trump must win to preserve the Constitution. He must win to preserve democracy in America. This is a must-win situation. Must win. So I have one ask for everyone in the audience, everyone who watches this video, everyone on the live stream. There's one request. It's very important. Register to vote.
That was Elon Musk over the weekend campaigning with Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, the site of the first attempt on Trump's life earlier this summer. Back with us for more, our signature political panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shan Zaino. So, Rick, it was described as Elon Musk there as a must-win race for Donald Trump. If it is a must-win, is your time better spent alongside Elon Musk in Pennsylvania or, say, doing a sit-down on 60 Minutes broadcast nationally like Kamala Harris is doing tonight?
Well, I would say it's good to be in Pennsylvania, right?
Sure.
The national broadcasts are great, and it's a lot of eyeballs, only a few of which are in the 7 targeted states. So he made his choice. I'm not going to second guess it. Frankly, I think he would have been much better off if he'd have just done that event alone. He had a massive crowd. They were here to see him and not to see Elon Musk dancing around the stage like a hippity-hopper guy. So, and I don't even know what a hippity-hopper guy is, but that's him. And so, like, we talked about this last week. You run the risk with a guy like Elon Musk. No one's going to get to write a speech for him. Yeah. He's not going to be on message. And this whole dark MAGA thing and all kinds of, sort of very, very negative things to say about the Democrats, the same things he's decrying them saying about Trump. I thought it put a pall on the event in Butler, and I think it could have been done without.
Wow. Well, I'm just going to pick up on the point you just made and point you to ABC this week. One of the Sunday morning shows, Speaker Mike Johnson was there and had this to say about the rhetoric that Democrats are responsible for the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Listen.
I don't think they're saying that the Democratic Party tried an assassination attempt. I think what they're alluding to is what we've all been saying. They have got to turn the rhetoric down. For years now, the leading Democrats in this country, the highest elected officials and the current nominee for president, have gone out and said that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, that, the republic will end if he's reelected. It's absolute nonsense.
But, Jeannie, just the night before, we just played the cut. Elon Musk said, quote, he must win to preserve democracy in America, unquote. Donald Trump has said that many times himself. So double standard here?
Well, I wouldn't accuse Elon Musk of that. Of course it is. I come from the academy. We talk about plagiarism all the time, and yet what do you see? You see Democrats now scratching their heads saying, hey, wait, that was our line. You stole it from us. And they are running with it. You mentioned Elon Musk. Donald Trump was saying it. Lara Trump was saying it over the weekend. Eric Trump. I mean, the list goes on because they want to make the case that this is a threat. I mean, this is where we are in this race this tight. You've got to paint the other guy or person as more threatening than your own side and drive up their negatives, rather. And that's what they're trying to do.
Well, as we consider what each side is trying to do and the message they are trying to get out there, Kamala Harris is going to be doing more interviews this week. We already, over the weekend, saw the dropping of the Call Her Daddy podcast, where she talked a lot about women's rights in particular. She's doing CBS tonight, The View as well. What else? The Late Show?
Howard Stern Show.
Stephen
Colbert.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All in one day.
Are any of these
Colbert.
reaching the audiences she needs to reach?
Yeah, it's a flood zone, right? You just want to crowd the scene, and I think that's what they're doing. And, of course, all these are sort of hand-picked constituencies. People who listen to these shows, watch the TV, are more likely to be either swing voters or her own, right? So this is a part of building momentum. I think what you're seeing now is we're getting into a phase of the campaign where it's even less about advocacy, my plans, my policies, here's, what my next administration is going to do, and more about turnout. And so they're trying to get people excited again. So we came out of the conventions, both for Trump and Harris, with wild excitement, no question about it. Then it's calmed down, and we went through the economic plans and the rollout of their policies. Now we're getting back into the push to elections. Because remember, people are voting in about a dozen states right now, today.
That's right.
Start tomorrow in Arizona. So this is where momentum creation begins.
Are these the right venues, Jeannie? And does Kamala Harris call out Howard Stern for some of the off-color humor that made him famous?
Oh, I don't think she will do that. Howard Stern has been a friend of the Biden administration, Joe Biden himself, and I would assume Kamala Harris. And I would say, as you go back to the Call Her Daddy, it is a very good interview, and people should listen to it, because look at what happened in Georgia today. They reinstitute the 6-week ban. They spent most of that interview talking about the issue of reproductive rights. Kamala Harris is very strong in that interview. And, of course, Alex Cooper herself is a more conservative. She grew up Catholic, anti-abortion. So it was a really fascinating turn there.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, our signature panel, getting us started on another wild week in politics. To that end, check out the Washington Edition newsletter. You can find it on the terminal and online.
And you can find us back here tomorrow. So thanks for joining on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.